Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Marissa Waterman. I'm the marketing director here at the Academy. Here with us today, we have some folks from Stanley Consultants and also someone from the city of Texarkana. They'll be discussing the EPA's Brownfield program and the Grimm Hotel renovation. Also joining us today is Dwayne Graves, a board-certified environmental scientist who works at Geosyntec. Dwayne will be serving as the moderator today. During the presentation, you'll be able to submit a question by clicking on the Q&A icon on the bottom of your screen. Dwayne and the three speakers will address the questions at the end of the presentation. Before we get started, Dwayne will give you a brief background of today's speakers. Hello, Dwayne, how are you?
Hey, good morning. How are you? It's nice to have everyone on here. And on behalf of the American Academy of Environmental Engineers and Scientists and our speakers, welcome to today's webinar. Today's webinar is sponsored by Stanley Consultants, a 109-year-old employee-owned firm with 26 locations in the U.S. and abroad. They specialize in delivering energy and infrastructure solutions to their clients. And a very warm thank you to the folks at Stanley for sponsoring today. We've got three speakers who represent various aspects of pulling off a successful brownfields project. And having been involved in a few of those myself, I know that there are lots of moving parts, many involved parties with varying interests that don't always coincide, and problems with sites themselves that have to be solved. So I'm looking forward to the presentation today. Our speakers are Ms. Daphne Ryan, the Grants Administration Manager and Brownfields Program Manager for the City of Texarkana. She's actively engaged in a variety of neighborhood services, housing-related efforts, and historic landmark preservation work in Texarkana, in addition to brownfields work that she's heavily involved in. Ms. Melissa Tiedemann is a Senior Environmental Planner for Stanley Consultants. She's been central to securing and managing multiple federal and state grants directed at brownfields redevelopment. And Ms. Julie Oriano is a principal environmental scientist also with Stanley, and her role in brownfields projects focuses on environmental due diligence, site investigations, risk assessments, and corrective actions necessary to return brownfields to productive use. We look forward to your presentation on a very substantial brownfields project in Texarkana. To the audience, please remember to type your questions into the chat, and we'll get to as many of those as we can at the end of the presentation. Ladies, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Dwayne, and thank you to everybody attending today. We are excited to talk about this very, very exciting project going on, almost complete in Texarkana. Again, I am Melissa Tiedemann, so thank you, Dwayne, for the introduction. We'll start it off a little bit, I guess. We would be remiss. I mean, we're here to talk about the Brownfields Cleanup Revolving Loan Fund program specifically, but we would be remiss if we did not at least take a quick step back and take a look at the EPA Brownfields program as a whole. So I started my career with a municipality in Iowa, managing our brownfield program. And that was where I was a planner by engineer. And so I was exposed to this within my own community. It happened to be my hometown. And so I really drew that sense of pride, I guess, in communities, and have been able to kind of duplicate that effort in all the communities that we've touched. Julie and I have been working with the EPA program for a number of years, even before it actually was a program. So the program itself, the Brownfields program, started in 2002 as an amendment to the CERCLA law. If anybody's ever dealt with CERCLA, they know it's very complicated. There's very moving parts. And so there was a number of clarifications to the CERCLA law that came out in the 80s. And then there was multiple clarifications in the 80s, throughout the 90s. And honestly, that's probably likely where the Brownfields program law came from, was really a clarification to that CERCLA law. But grant programs weren't new. Obviously, the program's not new. In '93, EPA that was the first year that they awarded an assessment grant, not under the Brownfields program, but it was an assessment grant from EPA, and that was to Cuyahoga County, Ohio. And for all of you history buffs or people that just like neat things, that was, if that sounds familiar to you, that was the place where the river started on fire, and not in a good way. That was where there was immense amount of industrial spills and just dumping into the rivers. It was, kind of acceptable, I guess, at the time. And the river started on fire and started all of the businesses in the port area on fire. It was a very large issue, and spurred a lot of discussions, and started that ball rolling for some environmental cleanup. So little history on the Brownfields program itself. Specifically, the BCRLF, or the Brownfields Cleanup Revolving Loan Fund, is the program that we're here to talk about today. It's one of the 3 major programs within the EPA Brownfields program. And you'll notice here the picture on the left side of your screen is the Denver Union Station. Also a very exciting project. Was not Stanley's, but a very exciting project that highlights the use of the BCRLF and its ability to leverage multiple other federal, state, local, private entities to come to the table and get a large site redeveloped. Another success story we want to quickly highlight is this Milwaukee Century City Business Park. So a very large, again, facility, multiple, you can see here 84 acres of industrial land transformed. The key thing I want to hone in on this slide is $4 million in EPA brownfields, which seems like a lot, I get, but the next number is what I really want to focus on, is that leveraging ability to come to the table with the 41.5 million in private and public. The EPA program is fantastic for being that first money in, making these projects a little bit more feasible for other entities, private developers to come to the table and make these projects work in the end. Again, 84 acres of industrial land transformed into a very nice amenity for the city of Milwaukee. This one, this is where I started my career, and ironically still stayed with it. This is my hometown. This is Waterloo, Iowa. We're right in the heart of Iowa, the breadbasket. And in the 50s, this was on the left, you can see is the wrath packing area. Has been there since the late 1800s, along the banks of the Cedar River, where a lot of development occurred throughout America, was along the rivers. So you can see this facility is, multiple buildings right adjacent to homes, right in the middle of neighborhoods. And that was its appeal, was these people could walk from their homes to their jobs. And this was, in its peak, one of the most highly sought after jobs in Iowa. And that's saying a lot, because 6 or 7 blocks down the street, we have one of the last John Deere manufacturing assembly plants. And this job was more highly sought after in its prime. So it hit its peak in the 40s and 50s, which this picture was taken in the 50s. And it was Iowa's largest employer. And it was the largest multi-story single unit meatpacking plant in the world in its prime. So that's the buildup. And then in the 60s, there was a lot of mismanagement by the owners. There wasn't a lot of reinvestment back into the facilities. Meatpacking as an industry was changing. It was less vertical and more horizontal, more of that lean manufacturing starting to kick up there. And in the early 80s, it started to falter a little bit. And the city, seeing this happen, they realized, wow, we need to save this. This is a lot of employment. This is right in the heart of our city. We need to do something. They stepped up. They offered a loan to the city, or excuse me, to the wrath packing plant. and it kind of floated them for a couple more years, but unfortunately the facility faltered and closed in 1985, leaving all those people unemployed. If anybody knows anything about the early 80s, especially in Iowa, saw a lot of unemployment. It was just not a good time. And so here we are with this very large facility, multiple buildings in a range of conditions, I'll say. And there was very few of them that could be saved. They were just in really pretty poor condition, and a reuse for them just wasn't able to be found. So this is when I come into it. In the late 90s, I started working as an associate planner for the city of Waterloo, and I grew up looking at these buildings. And so you can see in the picture on the right, I want you to focus on the pictures in the back, the buildings in the back, the brown buildings. Those are existing wrath packing buildings. So they were able to be reused. There was a facility or a business that came in and reused those buildings, not immediately, but pretty shortly after the closure of the packing facility. The awesome thing on the video or on the picture on the right is the redevelopment. All of the white buildings that you see here are new development. And the step that we took in here with the BCRLF was the demolition of, I'll send you back to the left video or left photo, is the large building right down the middle of there. That was the vertical kill structure. So it was multiple stories above ground. It was multiple stories below ground. It was just a very large structure for the city to tackle on its own. No developers were really interested in obviously taking that on. And so that was where this BCRLF stepped in and assisted the city in making this a more feasible redevelopment. So this is cold and dry storage now. And this newest facility here along closest to the banks of the river is their newest addition. So this has been I think there's been 4 additions since this original redevelopment in this. So great redevelopment for this site. So the key component to the BCRLF is the fact that it is one of the very few funding sources out there that you can use for these hard to fund or hard to remediate contaminants. I shouldn't say they're hard to remediate, they're hard to fund the remediation. Anyone that's worked in the brownfields arena knows that there's no magic bullet. There's no one funding source out there that will tackle everything. You can go and get an assessment grant and address some of those questions as to whether those sites are truly contaminated or if it's just a perception. But the BCRLF is that program that not only can tackle some of these contaminants, but also is one of the few programs that you can keep going as a community or as a grant recipient, because you get this initial award and then you turn around as that entity and you can loan it out or you can grant it out, assuming that those entities meet the qualifications for that sub-grant. But then those loan repayments then create this program that you now have in your use, in your toolbox to get other brownfield sites throughout the community redevelopment. So in that aspect, very unique and very fun to use as another key element that you can use to help redevelopment certain sites. Well, that was not good. So the big question is, why is it so underutilized? It is a great program for all its uniqueness, but it's difficult to use. Brownfield redevelopment in and of itself is very difficult. So you add that one more layer of difficulty and it just scares people away. I hope Daphne will share with you later, not her fear, but the nature, in approaching something like this. So there's a lot of extra layers, extra complications that the other programs don't have. And a lot of times, in larger communities where these brownfield sites are in higher demand, you don't see such a, what do I want to say, a hesitation by developers to step in. If the city can come in, or an entity that has that assessment grant can step in and do that initial assessment to figure out, okay, is it contaminated? If it is, what's there? How much is it? And how do we tackle it? That's the key element. And then, if you're in the middle of Chicago, Denver, LA, where inside these communities, these properties are very highly sought after, then, you can get to a comfort level for some of these developers to step in. That's not always the case. A lot of communities that Julie and I and Daphne is encountering, is not the case. We don't have those properties necessarily that are, super sought after. It's more the communities and the grant recipients looking for these developers to help get these programs or these sites redeveloped. And obviously, the ultimate goal is to get these sites remediated and back on a tax roll, because community economic gains are the most measurable benefit of brownfields redevelopment. That's why everyone comes to the table or wants to play the game. Remediated brownfields, they attract businesses create jobs, they retain jobs, and then obviously they have that increased investment, get those properties back on the tax rolls, creates revenue for the communities. It's a very snowball effect on these projects. And so that's why, this program has been funded, not at super high levels, but religiously every year has received funding in some manner. Now, the EPA estimates that redeveloped brownfields support 11 to 13% of job and housing growth from 2013 to 2030. So it's substantial that they can document and show that this program is contributing that much to the overall economic health of the US. Now for the exciting news, this is a little jump or a picture of the jump in brownfields funding as a whole that came from the Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act, or the IIJR, that just recently came out, that recently came out under the Biden administration. So to give you a little bit of an idea, in July of 2022, the EPA Brownfields program was funded at a $66 million level. So seems like a lot, but when you start looking at all of the entities that come to the table looking for this funding, it goes quick and it's very competitive. In September of 2022, so right now, and the program is actually open right now for grant applications to be submitted, there is $169 million available for new grants. So this this investment in this program not only is, doubling what we have seen in previous years, but I think, the writing is on the wall. They've proven that this program works and that it does fulfill these communities with that opportunity to, double, triple their money back in what they can do with this money coming in. So this slide simplifies a very, very complex project or program. So you've got the EPA on the far left. Obviously, they're the ones awarding the money to the cooperative agreement recipient. And we haven't been super specific here because this program has a lot of opportunities in who can come to the table as that cooperative agreement recipient. And then they have that opportunity, like we talked about earlier, to go out and provide these loans and or sub grants to those borrowers, which are the far right. And your typical borrowers are, property owners, developers, other agencies. And the key component here, which is not universal across a lot of the programs, is nonprofits. So this is the opportunity for them to come. They are a sub-grant, also opportunity to receive a sub-grant from this funding source. So you can see here, it looks very simple on this slide, but it is a very complex program. The key component here being that the borrowers then, when they pay back their loans, goes back to the cooperative agreement recipient, and then they have that opportunity to create this fund, loan that money out, and create this revolving loan fund that they can use for other sources. So with that being said, I would like to pass it over to Julie, and she's going to talk you through some of the key program roles within this program.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. And as Melissa said, I'm going to just talk a little bit more about what happens after the grant is awarded. So the RLF grant, there are several roles, but a couple of the key roles we wanted to highlight here are the RLF grantee who receives the funding. They'll want to hire an RLF manager to help run their program successfully because it is a complicated program. Then they'll work with the borrowers and subgrantees to loan money or grant if the subgrantee is an eligible entity for that. The grantee will also want to hire a qualified environmental professional. And so the qualified environmental professional, or QEP, can help the community understand the technical aspects of the cleanup and can help with the overall cleanup planning and execution, because most communities don't have an environmental professional on their staff. And of course, the EPA project officer, they'll be an extremely important source of information and guidance throughout the loan. So I know Melissa talked a little bit about the government red tape, and people sometimes worry about the EPA holding up the project a little bit, but I'll have to say that the EPA project officers that I worked on these RLF programs have been fantastic. They've been a great source of information, and they really haven't held up the program at all. They've been very quick to review reports and answer questions. And so, I can't emphasize enough that the EPA project officer will be a very important role in your RLF grant. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what a qualified environmental professional can help with on these projects. Stanley has provided QEP services on several Brownfields grants. A couple of things that the QEP can help the grant manager with is the loan requirements, such as the project reports and cleanup oversight. They can prepare community involvement plans and also help with the community outreach activities. The QEP also usually prepares the documents that are required as part of the RLF grant loan, such as the analysis of Brownfield's cleanup alternatives. This is a document that evaluates the different cleanup methods and make sure that the appropriate cleanup method is selected for the site. The decision document is a document that it's a summary of the final cleanup plan. And then, of course, the quality assurance project plan outlines the procedures for sampling and analysis. That'll be crucial for the cleanup contractor to have that information so they can complete the cleanup properly according to the EPA standards. And then critical health and safety plan, you definitely want a plan that protects the human health and environment during the cleanup. Don't want to make anything worse during the cleanup. And of course, the final cleanup documentation. And the QEP can help prepare that documentation and also help with the submittal to the EPA for that review. Another key component that the QEP can provide is the oversight of the cleanup that is done by the contractor. So the QEP can ensure that the cleanup is being conducted and documented properly. We can conduct the site visits to show up on site and make sure that what the contractor said that they were going to do is what they're actually doing at the site. We can review the contractor daily reports and disposal documents to make sure, and the invoices to make sure that, what they're saying they're doing coincides with their invoices when they come through. And, like, for example, during an asbestos cleanup, what we would do is we would review the disposal documents to make sure that the quantities invoiced and manifest match the daily reported quantities, and it matches their invoices in the end. And we can also provide review of the lab reports and to make sure that, like the air samples that were being conducted were being properly collected and there were no exceedances. So again, the QEP can just add that extra environmental oversight for the community that maybe would not have an environmental professional on staff. We have a couple recommendations for your RLF program to be successful. So one recommendation is, your RLF is for your community. So your community should decide early in the program how they want to use their RLF funds. For example, you might want to focus on a downtown area for development with some local developers, and you might want to offer a higher interest loan. You might want to focus on an area for low-income housing, and to spur that redevelopment, you might decide that you want to do a lower interest loan, or there may be an area of environmental injustice that you want to focus on. And like Melissa said, then you could offer some sub-grants to nonprofits, and those sub-grants wouldn't have to be paid back. So it's really up to your community to decide how you want to run your RLF program, which is one very nice thing about the program, because you can decide what your vision is for your community and cater it to your vision. And having that planning early on will just help with the loan application and approval process. So as applicants come in, you can decide whether they match your vision right off and tell them yes or no if you want to pursue that loan further. The second thing is you'll want to develop a team for administrating your RLF program. And they say it takes a community to raise a child. Well, it also takes a community for a successful RLF program. You definitely want buy-in from your community. And especially at first, there's a steep learning curve to managing the RLF. So you'll need a strong team of administrators. You want to have some attorneys review your RLF documents, business professionals. You'll need some environmental professional help. On your team, you'll want developers, the state and federal regulators. And as I mentioned before, the EPA project manager will be keys to successfully navigate this process. And as Melissa mentioned, these cleanups are subject to Davis-Bacon requirements. So you'll need someone that understands these requirements going forward. So with so many players involved, you'll really want to make sure that your communication and your organization and the community input are all definitely very important for this team to administrate your RLF program. One of the challenges of the RLF program can be marketing it. You'll need to get the developers, realtors, owners, and the banks not only to know that the community has this RLF grant available, but to just be comfortable enough with the process to apply for grants and to use the program. But the good news is that once you have a site developed, the community will see the success of the program and it will really just sell itself. Developers will come to you and will have more interest in the program, and it'll be much easier to market after you have the ball rolling. And what I think is the most important thing for your successful RLF program is to have a great manager that is not only knowledgeable in the program, because it is something that somebody can take and pick up and learn over time. But really, more than anything, you need to have a manager that is committed to the program and really has that passion to make this program successful. And so if you have that manager that is enthusiastic and doesn't get discouraged with failures, just keeps pushing towards progress, you really will have a successful program. And on that note, this is a great time for me to introduce Daphne Ryan with the City of Texarkana, Texas. Daphne is that grant manager that every community wishes they had. She's the reason that Texarkana has successfully managed several of the EPA grants over very many years and is now managing this Hotel Grimm revitalization project. So thanks, Daphne.
Thank you, Julie. Hello, everyone. I'm excited to be here today to talk about Texarkana's first full EPA Brownfields project, Hotel Grimm. To give you a little background, Texarkana sits on the border of Texas and Arkansas and is a twin city split by 3.8 miles State Line Avenue, where the center line is actually the state line. The Hotel Grimm also sits on State Line Avenue, and as you can see in this picture, if you notice the roundabout in the about center left, that's our federal courthouse and post office, and that building is split in half by the state line. We have 3 buildings in Texarkana that are split by the state line. The Grimm, it originally opened in 1925 as an 8-story hotel with 250 rooms and quickly became an iconic symbol for downtown Texarkana. This picture is on the rooftop garden during the grand opening. You may be wondering about the unique name of the hotel. William Rhodes Grimm was a prominent businessman in Texarkana who led the group of businessmen who planned the Hotel Grimm. Unfortunately, Mr. Grimm died before the project was completed, but they named the hotel in his honor. On the top floor of the hotel was a penthouse suite and a grand ballroom. Many residents still alive today remember attending proms and weddings and other special events in the grand ballroom. And overlooking the city from the rooftop garden, that was an extension of many of the events held in the ballroom. So what makes the Hotel Grimm unique? Well, Texarkana is a smaller community with a population just over 36,000, and our MSA population is just over 150,000, which includes Texarkana, Texas, Texarkana, Arkansas, and both of our counties, Bowie County, Texas, and Miller County, Arkansas. This was Texarkana's first time using our EPA RLF revolving loan fund. The funding complexity of this project was unique, to say the least. It has 7 different layers of financing. It was the first of its kind for the state of Texas. It was very much a learning curve, not only locally, but at the state level as well, just for this pro forma. We knew the Hotel Grimm would be a catalyst for downtown redevelopment. When people ask the city staff about downtown, they wouldn't ask, how is downtown redevelopment going? They would ask, how is the Grimm going? Because for us, as the Grimm goes, so goes our downtown. Community involvement was impressive for this project. There was a citizen-led Facebook page called Save the Hotel Grimm. During our 2018 comprehensive plan update, Hotel Grimm was noted repeatedly during our community input forums as to a priority site for redevelopment. And on the developer held at the beginning of reconstruction, held a sign lighting ceremony. The ceremony was to light up the Hotel Grimm, illuminate the Hotel Grimm sign, just as a symbol of putting new life back into the Grimm. And this is a picture of the street event that was held and the amount of community support there in attendance is rare for Texarkana. And this picture depicts a wide, very diverse group of people from every part of Texarkana, both on the Texas side and the Arkansas side, that was in support of this project. This rendition was the vision of redevelopment for Hotel Grimm back in 2019, when the original developer that carried this project forward first approached the city. So how did we get here? Well, the hotel closed in 1990 and sat vacant for over 30 years, with over 20 years of failed attempts for redevelopment. Staff, both current and former staff, have invested thousands of hours of time just trying to do our part to bring this project forward. This $27 million project with the 7 different sources of financing finally made the mark. Developers made a concerted effort throughout the redevelopment of the Grimm to hire local contractors. They trended about 70% local contractors throughout the whole project. Not only did they make an effort to hire local contractors, they also participated in the Section 3 hiring and participated in a Section 3 opportunity portal training the city hosted in Texarkana in an effort to promote registration by businesses. The end result will be a fully restored historic building, including the grand lobby that will be accessible to the public, the Palm Room, which will be meeting space for residents as well as the public, and 93 affordable apartments. Developers also added space for a coffee shop on the ground floor that will be a job training program. The next slide, it contains a lot of information. I don't expect you to be able to read any of this. I included this slide because it gives a picture of the efforts just over the past 13 years. The bumps in the road were plenty, but Jim Sarai of Sarai and Company knew he had a viable project when he first approached the city for support in his application for mixed-use affordable housing tax credits and city loans. And he stuck with it for the long haul. And the tax credits were not awarded at that time, but he kept pushing forward, revising the pro forma until the project was fully funded. And as you can see, it has many years and efforts by many people. One of the first steps was to get the hotel on the historic register. You can get a small glimpse from these pictures, from these historic photos of the Hotel Grimm in her prime. In the southeast corner of the building on the upper left, there was a pharmacy in the Hotel Grimm. And originally in the southwest corner was there was a bookstore at one time, and in the early years, there was a telegraph office. In the later years right before the hotel closed, on the northeast area was a restaurant called Sue and Carol's that is actually still in business in Texarkana today, but they relocated in the 90s when the Grimm closed. The picture on the lower right shows the Palm Room, which is located on the first floor on the west side of the building. There are some famous people that have been noted as staying in the Hotel Grimm in the early years. There was a famous opera singer, Lily Pons, that was said to have stayed several times in the hotel. 2015 was a very important year for the project because the Texas Historic Preservation Tax Credit Program went into effect. The National Historic Registry designation was approved. Federal historic tax credits were obtained. And that was there. We also did the Phase 2 environmental site assessment. And the city received one of 6 Council of Development Finance Agencies technical assistance grants that was awarded nationwide. A roadmap for the Grimm redevelopment was prepared as part of that award. And the technical assistance team offered the community insight into options, including a comprehensive report offering strategies for refinancing. This technical assistance garnered so much community support just by these professionals from outside of Texarkana saying this project is viable, it can be done, and here's a roadmap as to how it can. These are a few pictures of the technical assistant team's visit. The one in the upper right offers a close-up of the original ornate plasterwork. And in the lower right is a picture of the rooftop garden that looks much different from the original that you saw earlier. In 2018, the development team announced a new co-developer, Cohen Esri, to work alongside Sarai and Company, as well as finalizing lending agencies such as Citibank, Chase, and investors such as Clock Tower Tax Credits and Affordable Housing Partners. Adding these reputable partners renewed public confidence in the project as well as our confidence in the project. The new development team visited the site. I can't really tell you the number of times I've visited the Grimm during these 13 years, but in the upper left picture is the staircase between the first and second floor, the only one at the time that we found passable, but it had a large gap. We nicknamed this move the Texarkana Stretch and Leap because of the significant gap in the staircase. Later, we discovered removing a couple of plywood panels on the exterior would expose a much safer route to the upper floors.
And so the building had extensive contamination from asbestos and lead. And there's an air cell, which is an asbestos treated cardboard that was used as pipe wrap throughout the building on the steam and hot water lines. And as the building deteriorated and, the roof broke and water came through the building, this air cell material fell from the ceiling and contaminated much of the furniture and the debris throughout the entire building, which has complicated the cleanup and assessment of the asbestos contaminated material for disposal. As you can imagine, it's much easier to go in if the pipe wrap is in place around these pipes rather than years and years of deterioration and trespassing. It just was kind of scattered throughout the building. And as you can see in the bottom corner on the chair, there was just dust of asbestos everywhere.
So these are a few more pictures of the investors' visit to Texarkana. In the upper left picture is the grand ballroom area. You can't really tell that it's a grand ballroom in this picture, but sometimes perhaps maybe in the 70s or 80s, they divided the ballroom, most likely the 80s, they divided the ballroom into multiple rooms. In these pictures, you see a lot of debris, and some of that is due to deterioration. But a lot of it is due to vandalism. The grim was broken into many times over the years, some due to just overwhelming curiosity, but other times by homeless just trying to get out of the weather and stay warm, or maybe to find some scrap metal to sell, or by someone just wanting to take a piece of the grim to treasure. So as the performer continued to be finalized, the team decided the best route for project success was to transition to affordable housing. Premier Texarkana Development and Management Facility Corporation joined the team, along with Sauer Company and Cohen Esri, and Texarkana Grimm Housing Partners was formed. As you can see, the Hotel Grimm project was well represented in all areas. Now, this did create a very interesting closing because there were over 100 people required on the closing from the East Coast to the West. So there was a very small window of opportunity during the day to coordinate everyone's schedule due to the multiple time zones. Now that I've given you an overview of the overall project, let's talk about assessment and cleanup of the site, exactly how our Brownfield funds were used. The city was first awarded EPA Brownfield funds in 2010. It was not initially assigned to me, but once it was, I knew this program was fit for me. I love exploring old buildings and finding what makes each one unique. Like in this picture, which is part of the basement of the Hotel Grimm, there are a lot of interesting old equipment in the basement that remained, even though their life passed and more modern equipment, took its place long ago. These pieces were just too large to remove without great expense, but I'm glad they were still there. We were able to save a lot of metal pieces out of the Grimm and some pieces off of these old pieces of equipment. A sculptor from Dallas, George Tobolowski, secured parts of these old machines and other metals from the Grimm and is creating a sculpture for the property. We were a little lost in the beginning, to say the least. But once we contracted with our qualified environmental professional, they really helped us through the weeds with our assessment grant. We tried really hard to time the phase one on the Grimm property in line with the developer's closing. So we didn't perform the assessments right away. We wanted to, make sure that we tried to make sure they didn't expire, but also did it early enough that it didn't slow down the project. We ended up having to update the phase one later on just because of various delays, so don't be concerned with this too much on your project, because try as you might, to keep from slowing it down, it doesn't always come together as smoothly on these complicated projects as you want it to. During this time, the city, we continued to seek additional EPA funds that would offer a complete package for redevelopment. And in 2012 is when the city was awarded our EPA revolving loan fund for just over $1 million. And of course, the Hotel Grimm was one of our first thoughts for a possible cleanup loan. And again, with this new funding, the city, our inexperience offered challenges. We contracted with Stanley Consultants as our qualified environmental professional for our EPA RLF fund. And their knowledge and experience really helped us move the Grimm project forward. These funds were important for our city and for our downtown, as well as our older corridors. Our downtown, began its decline in the late 70s and early 80s. I-30 was completed in the late 60s through what at the time was cattle pastures. But after, in the 70s, development started to move forward along the I-30 corridor. Many retail stores began to relocate from downtown along that corridor. A mall was built in 1978, which further moved retail north. Which left a significant number of empty buildings, and a lot of them just did not recover from this migration. But we knew that the Hotel Grimm would be a key project for our downtown program, for our Brownfields program, and especially for our downtown redevelopment. So in 2014, the developer did ask us to move forward with the original phase 1, since at that time he anticipated closing within 6 months. The phase 1 was performed, and the phase 2 shortly afterward.
And so we often get asked, where are the contaminants coming from when we do these site assessments? The Hotel Grimm historically was a cotton gin at one time. There was a filling station on one end of the property, and there was a battery storage facility on the north side of the Grimm Hotel. But there were also a lot of just dry cleaners. There's a lot of historical uses in these downtown areas that have been developed for so many years. And so part of the phase 1, of course, is to identify those potential contaminant sources. For the Grimm Hotel, there were some slight exceedances. When the phase 2 was completed, there were some slight exceedances in the soil and the groundwater on the northern portion of the property in the area where the previous petroleum station was located. And those included mercury, arsenic, and lead in soil and the groundwater, which is typical, like I said, of most older downtown areas, especially if there were some old service stations in the area. The phase 2 noted that these exceedances in the groundwater were likely just due to the turbidity of the groundwater. So the plans early on were always that the contaminated area would be encapsulated as a parking lot, so there would be no risk for human health to interact with the soils and the contamination, and that would address the soil remediation. We also plan to address it with a municipal site settings designation, and EPA was okay with this plan. They said it was acceptable to protect human health.
So when the developer that first submitted their EPA revolving loan application, it was for $650,000, and they began their cleanup plan. Swift Creek Environmental prepared the cleanup plan for Sauer and Company. We were certainly excited because this was our first RLF application, and we saw our Brownfields program starting to get a little bit momentum. The final development team contracted with Tetra Tech as their environmental professional and worked with Swift Creek on updating the cleanup plan. The site visits began to occur more often. OG Historic Preservationist was brought on board to begin working on the Part 2 historical clearance. And Munoz and Company was hired as the architect. Lending agencies and investors began to visit the site more often. The closing date was set, and we really began to see a path clearing. Since more than 180 days had passed since the phase 1 was completed, an update was needed. The city's assessment grant by this time had closed. So Texas Commission on Environmental Quality Brownfields program came to the rescue and performed the update to the phase 1, which really helped to ensure the project continued moving forward. And we were really glad to have them as partners on this project. Because our initial phase 2 found exceedances in the soil and groundwater, lenders and investors wanted confirmatory sampling, and Swift Creek, in partnership with EnviroPhase, conducted a phase 2 limited subsurface investigation to confirm the extent of arsenic and lead impacts to the soil and the lead impacts to the groundwater. Their results did not find exceedances in the soil or groundwater samples, and also noted turbidity as the most likely reason for the original results. Tetra Tech also conducted some additional asbestos testing just to finalize a very comprehensive cleanup plan. Our action items, they begin to be checked off between our QEP, Stanley Consultants, and the developer's environmental team. The developer let bid for asbestos and lead abatement, and the winning bidder, building abatement and demolition, completed interior abatement within 9 months. So all in all, there were 4 different environmental professionals on this GRIM project working together. Project lenders, they needed a no further action determination from TCEQ. With the 2 sets of soil and groundwater samples yielding different results, TCEQ, they worked with the developers to come up with options that would provide them a no further action determination. The developer chose to abate the contaminated soil and bring in new fill for the parking lot, and this was added to the overall cleanup plan. Soil remediation and encapsulation, as well as the municipal settings designation originally planned, was completed. So during all of this, our path was made easier by a number of people, including our EPA Region 6 team. I want to do a special shout out to Kamisha Scott Marshall, because she, has helped us so much over the years with our Brownfields program, and just trying to make sure that we were successful. Our QEP, Stanley Consultants, we could have not have navigated through this without Julie Ariano and Todd Naus on our side. We have also great mentors in Region 6 who are always willing to share their knowledge and experience. And so don't be afraid to reach out to other cities in your region, or even other regions that have successful brownfields programs. This project was a long and bumpy road, but well worth the journey. We're almost at the final end. I would like to take a moment to share a few pictures with you. Starting with the grand lobby, the historic preservation plans require that the grand lobby, as well as the 2nd floor mezzanine, the palm room, and the grand ballroom on the 8th floor be historically restored. And as you can see in the pictures, the plaster work on the ceiling was very ornate.
Yeah, and you can also see the metal railings up on the 2nd floor. Much of the metal on the railings and the stairs, the doors, and the window frames all had lead-based paint that was chipping and peeling. And so all of that had to be removed. And because this building will be housing, the lead levels are required to meet HUD standards. So that was part of what the QEP, as a QEP, we did some oversight and just checked the lead abatement process and then the final cleanup levels.
This is a close-up shot of a restored ceiling panel. It provides some insight into the detail involved in the restoration. The master craftsman was commissioned from Northern California, and he stated once that he often uses a toothpick to obtain this type of detail. I'd also like to share with you the grand ballroom after abatement. This area is going to be public meeting space for both residents and the general public. And the barrel ceiling on this next picture is very unique. This stairwell took guests from the 1st floor to the 2nd floor mezzanine, but for us, it was not passable on the 2nd tier of this staircase that you can't really see in the picture. The hotel kitchen area on the 1st floor, plans for this area is a warming kitchen that will be used for the event space. There are also plans, this is for a coffee shop that will be a job training program for a local nonprofit, Mission Texarkana, that works with our homeless population as well as those at risk of homelessness, and plan to open this coffee shop as a job training program.
And as you can see on the left picture, the duct wrap in the kitchen also contained that asbestos wrap, and the wrap had deteriorated and contaminated all this debris with asbestos fibers. And as you can imagine, this increased the cost and the complexity of the disposal, because again, it wasn't just a nice little area of asbestos material that you could dispose in the hazardous landfill. Really all of the debris had to be evaluated as asbestos contaminated.
So this this is the 8th floor ballroom before abatement and after. And you can see, excuse me, you can see in the picture damage done to the ceiling over the years. But I'll share with you in the next photo that the restoration was almost complete for the ballroom at this point for as far as the ceiling. This picture offers stark contrast for damage from over time and the same area after restoration. It's just an amazing transformation. I love these pictures. Just the exterior restoration was amazing to watch. Just a power wash and brick pointing and new windows, and the hotel looks like a whole new building. I want to share with you a couple of interesting finds that we had after abatement. This is on the left is a single footprint in the 8th floor concrete, and it looks as if someone just accidentally stepped off the walkway during an early tour back in the mid-20s. And also on the right is some stamped brick with a 1924 date. It's my understanding the developer planned to leave some of these exposed as part of the decor. And to share a few lessons learned, you know, financially capable investors and developers who are willing to share information is essential. Oftentimes, you know, well, all the time, these folks know a whole lot more than we do who are, you know, running the Brownfields program. And just that open communication is very important. Be prepared to invest a significant amount of time up front. For this project, staff time was needed to help prepare the Historic Register nomination. Of course, the phase 1 and phase 2. Our HUD 108 loan application took a significant amount of staff time, but was well worth it in the end. Open public engagement and participation is important. And again, all of this requires significant staff time, but be patient and flexible along the way. You're likely to have more failures than successes, as we can attest to over 20 years of failed attempts at redevelopment. But each one of these is a learning opportunity, even if it doesn't feel like it at the time. And I'll add one more, and that is to definitely participate in your state's voluntary cleanup program. We did not in the beginning, and you know, we learned our lesson well there, but that is the way you'll get the no further action determination. And you know, quality investors and lenders want that no further action determination for sure. Now, a few quotes along the way that I'll share with you from Tom Anderson, Managing Partner, Cohen Esri Development Group. Texarkana seemed like a place that wanted to do business. And with over half a dozen financial sources, the GRIM may take the cake as the most layered and complex pairing of historic and housing tax credits in the state's history. But we know it will soon be highlighted nationally as a gem of both historic preservation and downtown revitalization. That was from Jay Johnson, Development Director of Cohen Esri, and his words are definitely coming true. From Mike Myers, VP of Construction with AHP, a Berkshire Hathaway company, this development checked all the boxes for us. It was downtown revitalization, located in the rural heartland, included historic preservation, and added affordable housing. So all of these things were important in order to get those type of investors on the project. So as I mentioned before, you know, we knew that the Brownfields program, the Hotel GRIM project, would be a catalyst for downtown revitalization. And there are many other buildings that need this gap funding. It's essential to be able to make these deals work. This is the former hotel, First National Bank. And sometime in probably the 70s, the owners added marble panels facade to to the exterior of the former First National Bank. The current owner in this picture is starting to remove those marble panels just because he needed the original building exposed in order for the historic designation with the state as well as national. And the next picture is just an closer shot of that same building to show you some of the detail. This building also borrowed a significant 2 loans from our RLF program for abatement, and it was completed this past year, and they are in the process of securing the rest of their financing and starting to redevelop this site. This project was actually, all privately funded, but it was spurred by Hotel Grimm redevelopment, and it was just a vacant building, that was deteriorating, and it sat across from a catty corner from our historic Perot Theater, and the developer has redeveloped it into what we now have as a very successful and popular salon, the Beauty Bar. And I shared this picture with you. This is our Courthouse Square project. As I mentioned earlier, the U.S. Post Office and Courthouse is split by the state line. And we redid this entire area to add more green space. We exposed the original brick streets. We added a food truck area. And this space has started being utilized a lot. And I include this picture because it is the beginning of our state line corridor project that will utilize a great deal of EPA Brownfield assessment, planning, and cleanup dollars. So Hotel Grimm is projected to be completed by December 30th of this year. And I believe they are pretty much fully leased out at this point, and we are excited and we look forward to what's next for downtown Texarkana. We have a lot of developers that are interested in a few different properties, and we see our EPA Brownfields program really taking a turn and being more successful. And these are just a few links that if you want more information about Hotel Grimm Apartments or the Hotel Grimm, I think if you Google Hotel Grimm, you will get a wealth of information from anything from actual information to folklore. And also there's a Paraseeker video on YouTube where they visited the Hotel Grimm and have some recordings that they state on the video could possibly be Lily Pond still singing in the Hotel Grimm. So, don't just go out there and Google Hotel Grimm and you'll find out a lot of information.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Presenter information, contact information is posted on the screen right now for our audience. And we have a few questions and a few minutes left. So let me kind of moderate those, and I'll let the three of you kind of decide, who wants to jump in. But, time is money on these developments. How long, once you have, a package ready to go to EPA, how long does it take that process to turn around? And are there any tricks of the trade that can kind of grease the skids, make that process go smoother and faster?
Sorry, I was muted. I'll take that first, and then everybody else can just weigh in. Probably within 2 months from the time you receive an RLF application, that it goes through, approval and fully executed. We have a RLF review committee on our for Texarkana. So once we receive the application, it goes to the EPA RLF review committee, and They decide, you know, if it's a viable project. They set the loan terms, and then once they approve it, we send it to EPA, our project officer, for review. And then after that, of course, it has to go to our council. So, you know, all in all, we at least go to 2 council meetings. We have a first briefing that, you know, provides our council with an overview, and then they have time between that meeting and the next one to, you know, research it, kind of take it in, and then we have a public hearing at the second meeting and a council vote. So it's about 2 months.
Great, thanks. That's actually faster than I thought you were going to say. So that's good news. We've got a question about contamination in the building as well. Involves asbestos. And were there air permits required? And has the cleanup been so complete that if you have to do future work, you make repairs, do things in the hotel, you know, is there any asbestos risk left? Will that continue to be part of, you know, ongoing health and safety management in the building?
Yeah, and I can talk to that. Our asbestos professional isn't on the call today, so I'll try to do my best. But the contractor BAD, that was the abatement contractor, they took care of all the abatement permits. And so, you know, they do this all the time. They know what's needed at the state level. They do monitoring as they do the removal. And so they did an excellent job of just making sure that all those requirements were met throughout the entire process. And I believe all of the asbestos was removed in this building. There's nothing left. In other projects, sometimes, you know, they might have a maintenance room. Well, they'll leave some pipe wrap on the equipment that's locked away, that the public can't get to, that, you know, it's marked as asbestos, and only the maintenance people can access those areas. But I believe in the GRIM, everything was removed. And part of that was because, you know, there was just so much debris contamination. There wasn't a lot of areas that were just nicely wrapped where they wanted to maintain that insulation.
Okay, great. So to specifically ask one follow-up related to the question, it sounds like, well, let me just ask, do you know if BAD had to apply for and get an air quality permit?
I don't believe it's an air quality permit, but I know they do air testing while they do the cleanup to make sure that the procedures that they are using are not allowing any fibers to escape the room that they're working in. So, and like I said, I'm not completely sure about the permitting process, but there are some state they work with the state, and the state regulators would come in and do observations as needed. And then during the cleanup, they do air monitoring. And then afterwards, they also do air monitoring just to make sure that, you know, there are no fibers left. So
okay, great.
They have that, yeah, all very well documented.
Right. Okay, thanks very much. Kind of related to that, when you start thinking about reuse and developers who may not be terribly familiar with working on brownfield sites, obviously, lead and asbestos is fairly common in old buildings, but you ran into a number of other things because of past uses of the property. What were the things that were of greatest perceived or real risk in the developer's mind?
I think it was more so of the investors and the lenders that wanted that no further action determination. When you have investors with a good reputation, you know, they want to ensure that, especially with housing, they want to ensure that the health and safety of the residents of that housing is considered far into the future. You know, they don't want to have a cleanup and then have an unknown come out 20 years later. which, I mean, it could happen anyway, but when they do that extra, due diligence, then, it pretty much ensures that it's covered.
Great, thanks. Looping back, kind of to wrap up the asbestos. Sorry, Julie. I didn't get this in on the first run. A question came in: was the asbestos mostly friable or encapsulated?
I believe it was mostly friable. I should have my phone a friend on the line to ask our expert here, but yeah, I think it was considered friable, and as you saw in those pictures, it really was just as it deteriorated, kind of just went all throughout the building. And I did want to add, that is one of the good things about this RLF program, is because there aren't a lot of grants or loans out there available to clean up lead and asbestos. So a lot of the developers that are targeting these RLF grants, they have some familiarity with the asbestos and lead, because they've used this grant before, just because there's not a lot of other funding sources out there to clean up those contaminants.
I think, Daphne, you mentioned that a coffee shop was going in the ground floor of the GRIM, but you also seem to link that to a job training program. As I recall, there are some community development aspects to these loans as well, for on-the-job training, assistance to disadvantaged businesses, and maybe some things like that. Can you speak about what the other related requirements are for the fund, other than just getting the building put back together?
Sure. Yes, EPA wants to see jobs created. They want to see jobs created for disadvantaged areas. They want to see those funds utilized to help those that are most in need. So part of that, part of what we report on is how many jobs did the cleanup itself bring to Texarkana. But not only that, how many jobs does the redevelopment project bring to Texarkana? And, the development team wanted to add this coffee shop as kind of a part of the community space. They had a plan for community space in the GRIM, and this was a component that really helped those most in need. We have several job training programs, and many of them are done by Mission Texarkana, but there are other nonprofits in town as well that have job training programs. But the developer wanted to add this coffee shop, and not only does it bring immediate jobs, but it also trains individuals to move forward into more advanced jobs in the future.
Yeah, great, thanks. You had a lot of moving parts here, a lot of stakeholders, and you said there were, over 100 folks involved and they're scattered across the country. Do you recommend that trying to keep that crowd a little smaller, or and did you find competing interest? When you get that many people together, how did you keep peace in the family with all that going on?
Well, at times it was difficult, but all I can say is there was a lot of determined people that just kept pushing forward. We held weekly conference calls just to keep everybody on task and, give updates on each task. And it was difficult at times because, each entity had a legal team that's, supposed to look out for their best interests, of course. And so at times that was difficult, but in the end, they came to a common ground and was able to move forward. And I know the person who had to schedule that closing call with over 100 people, deserves an island getaway somewhere for that.
No doubt. All right. I think that was our last question. We're at 15 past the hour. Marissa, do you have any parting comments before we wrap things up?
Yes, thank you, Dwayne. And thank you to our speakers for sharing your knowledge with us today. If anyone would like to reach out to them directly, please feel free. And if you guys could type your email addresses in the chat, that would be excellent. A few items to mention before we wrap up. We have several webinars planned in the near future, so you can go to aaees.org/events to check them out and register. And if you're interested in sponsoring an upcoming webinar, please reach out to me directly. My email is mwaterman@aaees.org. And just a reminder, if you're not yet an AAES member and you're considering joining, just email me and we can discuss the membership options that we have. Last but not least, our PDH certificates for this event will be sent out shortly. That's all for today. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.